Hey, it's Sean Murphy. I'm sitting here today talking with Alex Paneed at Mission Automate. We're going to take a look at a little bit about what Mission Automate does and then look at kind of what we think is coming in AI, the impact of AI on our lives and the future of work, and whatever else we stumble across in the next 45 minutes to an hour.
That sounds great. Thank you, Sean. Great to be here.
So, you want to talk a little bit about what Mission Automate does for people that are not familiar with it?
So we are applied AI R&D team. We have clients that come to us with AI challenges, and we survey the market to identify the best solutions for their challenges. Sometimes that's just taking pieces that are off the shelf and connecting them together. Sometimes it involves creating some creative solutions at the back end, and sometimes it may even mean developing custom algorithms or training custom models.
So you are broadly focused on artificial intelligence applications, and you help other startups and more established firms develop or enhance or extend products that they're working on with elements or components of artificial intelligence technology. Did I get it?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah, so we're more or less an AI enabler team. Whether that means researching solutions that are on the market, understanding the technologies better, or whether it means developing an actual tool or product for a specific use case.
AI has become a little different from, I think you have to go back to maybe the 90s when Moore's Law was moving a lot faster than it was now, where you were looking at technologies moving fast. So when you talk about research, it's a very rapidly evolving field that has attracted a tremendous amount of investment. So I would assume that's a substantial component of the value that you offer your clients.
I think so. I think the way that I see it is that AI is pretty expensive, and it's becoming more and more used. And it has expanded so quickly that a lot of companies out there are interested in adopting it without completely understanding how it can help them. So there's a bit of unease, and so that's one place that we come into a relationship or an engagement is discuss with a company, hey, AI, it's fine. AI is fine. It's not going to have adverse effects for you. Instead, here's how it can help your team, depending on their specific business and use case.
There's probably not one next big thing in AI. There's probably a lot of things in AI. What are some of the developments that you're most interested in or most excited about?
I think there are two major directions in which AI is being developed that are of major interest to me, at least. I think one aspect is that the big name services, ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude, which are very used in both by users and for vertical products, those are in a race to stay relevant. And so they're investing a lot of effort into developing new features, creating better models. ChatGPT just came out with their most recent model. They're essentially trying to beat, I think, with this one, they're trying to beat Claude because Claude used to have the largest context, and O1 from ChatGPT now has larger context than Claude's models. So context is one direction in which LLMs are being developed. And the easiest way to think about that is that effectively you're making them more capable at reasoning about the queries that come from users. That's one direction that I think all of the three major companies, Anthropic, Google, and OpenAI, are investing in. The other direction that I think that AI is expanding into is a secondary focus for these big vendors, and that's creating smaller models with as much capacity as they can fit into a smaller model. Smaller models have the advantage that they're usually faster, and they're usually cheaper. And so for many users, they don't need the highest context model all the time. So smaller models are desired, especially when you have a volume application that doesn't require deep reasoning skills from its LLM. What's interesting about this direction of development is that simply by virtue of being less technologically demanding, smaller models are also popular in open source teams because they're actually feasible. With the larger models, like the really big model advancements that are coming from the big vendors, those are prohibitive to open source. So it's not as easy for the open source community to compete there and to progress there. You really have to rely on the big companies for that.
And Facebook, and I forgive my ignorance, but Facebook is kind of straddling that divide, right? Because they're taking more of an open source approach, but they're developing some big models as well, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Facebook has been very friendly to the open source side. I think that because they came into the market a bit later, relatively a bit later than ChatGPT, they've had maybe a bit of a harder time becoming popular with the end users. So people generally don't think of Llama first. They think of ChatGPT, they think of Gemini, they think of Claude. Um, right. I think Google in particular had a big advantage in that it's a gigantic company, and so they were able to invest a tremendous amount into the marketing around their Gemini product. Claude is not as well known, but the reason I think these are popular is that besides from being fantastic technologies, they are very popular with the end user. So people just jump on and start to use them.
I'm going to try and answer that question a different way because I went to college a few years ago, took some artificial intelligence courses, and so I had kind of like in my first few years of working when the brighter computer science students had gotten all excited about AI and ran into a thing that was called AI nuclear winter in the late 80s, and then just to make sure that there wasn't a one-off, there was another one in the mid 90s. Um, and somewhere in the middle there, Werner Vinge, a good science fiction author, wrote a essay called "The Coming Singularity," right, where he predicted that AI was going to so transform our world that it would be unrecognizable. There would be a before and an after, which I think shapes some of the thinking, certainly some of the apocalyptic thinking or the rapture of the nerds. I guess so I've been very dubious about a lot of this stuff. Uh, and John McCarthy, I think it's John McCarthy, has said one of the problems with AI is as soon as it succeeds, as soon as an AI application succeeds, it's no longer called AI, right? So it's like, yeah, AI
Sure.
is all the stuff we're working on that doesn't work yet. Um, I guess I'm starting to believe that there are practical applications. It's not just hype. It's not just people banging the big brass drum. But I think you're still going to keep a person in the loop. These are my biases. So my prediction is that for most of this, we're going to keep a person in the loop, and that it's going to be more of an adjunct or an enabler or a support function as opposed to something running open loop. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but I think it's different. It's I don't think we're going to be kept as pets by our AI overlords, although I know some very smart people that believe that. So maybe the last laugh will be on me.
Well, I think what could happen in the future is is unknown, right? However, I also my personal opinion is exactly that we're not going to be turned into slaves or pets by the AI. I think that that's very unlikely. I think a more the more likely dystopian future that I see. So I'll start with the really kind of like on the spectrum of predictions, I'll start with the dark ones and kind of move to the more
Yeah,
positive
yeah.
ones. I think uh, a more likely, but still very unlikely, I would say, future would be that AI is somehow enabled in hardware applications where it can cause destruction. And that can mean a lot of different things. And not because somebody intentionally causes it to cause destruction, but because, AI is still unpredictable to a certain degree and will continue to be unpredictable. One side note here about the unpredictability of AI is that we're training AI on human knowledge, and people in general are unpredictable, right? When you compare them to the ideal of perfect logic, rationality, and objectivity. So I think that's one thing that could happen, right? So something where you have an AI that's controlling the global power grid, and it misunderstands something, it goes into power saving mode, you know, something like that. That is something that I think is more on the spectrum of possibility. It's still unlikely, but I think that that's the main, in my mind, that's the main thing that the AI safety advocates are worried about. That's the kind of issue. Perhaps a more middling and more likely prediction. I actually think this is the most likely possibility is that AI is going to become a commodity that's going to be controlled by large organizations, essentially. And so the status quo that kind of exists right now to some degree, right? So it's the large organizations that have access to the more advanced technology and they decide how it gets distributed. And that doesn't mean that people can't make products and get investments and create new things, but there will still be a small number of organizations that will control the most advanced technology. The reason I think that this is the most likely thing is that the more advanced models now are getting to the point where it takes something on the order of $1 billion just to train a model once, right? So that's a staggering amount of money just for pretty much any company except the most lucrative ones, the most powerful ones out there. So I think that um, that's the economic, that's what the current economy sort of supports and the current way that things are being developed. The utopian possibility, which I think is more likely than the dystopian one, but still not super likely, is that we would get to this type of technological singularity, which, if you combine that idea with AI, it would be that AI is able to improve itself. And through a combination of AI's own will or support from people, it becomes an enabler of big advancements for everyone. Big advancements in optimizing food yields, medicine, optimizing economy, transportation, power. So a lot of these different aspects of daily life that will make daily life more affordable for everybody and make it easier for everybody to get access to basic needs.
Trend certainly since the Industrial Revolution, which is arguably the last singularity we kind of saw, but we're still recognizably, I, I don't know if that's recognizable, is this human flourishing that it unlocked a bunch of. So I think in the long run, to me the problems with AI are not AI per se. It's the problem of human evil. It's the use that the different people that are defining things or defining the technology what they're going to use, you can put the same technology in the hands of, we'll just pick the Norwegians and the Chinese and whatever, the guys in Fiji, and I think you'll get three different very kinds of applications, right? And as we've seen, the Chinese are starting to construct open air prisons. So to me, that's a reflection more of the culture than the technology per se. It's kind of hard to recapture what it was like before cell phones and Google, which arguably has tremendous, at least in the United States, has tremendously transformed the quality of our life. Now, the other side of it is the cell phones are also look a little bit like carrying a slot machine in your pocket, that there's this addictive, so it's always a mix.
Right.
It's interesting that in terms of like electric power, for example, the cost to build a electric power plant or a nuclear power plant is order of magnitude $1 billion or more, right? And yet all that means is I have available in my house for a couple of pennies a particular unit of energy, that power. So we've somehow been able to decouple the need for massive investment with some kind of complete control, right? In a way that we probably need to avoid as these huge models roll out as well.
Your point is taken, and I think that ultimately the technology will no longer be under the control of a few entities. That's what's usually happened, except with pretty much all advances. Ultimately, you get to the point where the
So
technology itself becomes
probably
monopolized.
the Russian military, U.S. military, Chinese military are going to have access to technologies that you and I are not going to have in our backyard or our whatever, our basement, right? So I
Of
think
course,
there is
yeah.
going to be a separation, but I hope there's not the stratification that there's certainly a risk of.
Like you said, I think that such a possibility is more related to culture than to the technology itself. And so, in respect to that, I think that as a society, we have the responsibility of deciding how we going to conduct ourselves, the values that we promote. And in terms of the technology, I think AI is a lot more applicable and a lot more accessible than other types of advanced technology, such as military uh, technology.
Right. Let me build on that for a minute, because so back when I was a boy and you had a computer, you had a file structure. And so it was essentially, if you wanted to find where you'd put something, you had a menu tree, what was that file name, right?
Yeah,
And then various flavors of keyword search developed. I can remember putting on location on my Mac in about 1991, and all of a sudden I could type in words that were in the file instead of having to look through directories for 45 minutes. Where did I save that?
yeah.
It could find it, so we kind of went from menus to keyword search. And I think to your point about accessibility, it seems like what we're on the edge of now is being able to just ask conversational questions, whether typing them in or maybe even verbally, that um, I think in Star Trek 4, there's a point where somebody hands Scotty a mouse to ask the computer a question. So he picks it up and he talks into it like it's a microphone, right? Because he's from the future and things work better.
Right.
And that may be a singularity of sorts that we cross, where search just becomes asking questions, right?
That is certainly one aspect in terms of accessibility. That's, let's say, user accessibility. There's a different aspect that I think is important, which is maybe creative accessibility is a way to describe it. Accessibility to AI as a building block. What I'm trying to say is that while we're already sort of at the point where the average user can get on ChatGPT and ask questions, we're also at a point right now, at least, where you can build your own tools using AI technology. So either whether you use ChatGPT on the back end or whether you build something with Llama, which is a bit more open source, or a different open source model, we currently developers and product creators have that accessibility where they can make their own products. They can't make another ChatGPT. That's not accessible. But they can make offshoots, right, and more AI assistants that are more focused on specific use cases. And I think that's going to continue to stay that way. The risk when you have very advanced technology that's controlled by a small number of people is that other people won't be able to make use of it to transform it into something else. So, for example, let's say that ChatGPT came up with, and I'm not saying that's what would happen. I'm just using OpenAI as an example, right? This company creates a model which is so advanced as to be completely indistinguishable from a human being, right? And it's also instantaneous. It can answer any question. It has access to the latest data. So, does Google search and it understands the difference between what's relevant information, what's up-to-date information, and what's not. It understands hallucinations, it can prevent them, et cetera, right? So you're talking to a perfectly benevolent and all-knowing assistant. Now, this company that's created this model could say, you can access it and it's free, even, right? Or the cost is very small, but you can only access it through our app. You cannot recreate anything with it. Right? So this hasn't happened, and I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying that any private or privately owned company or even publicly traded company um, that would create such a technology has, technically speaking, the option of saying you can only access this through our website or through our official app. So that's, I think, the risk of the fact that this very advanced technology is being controlled by a small number of very large players. I don't think it's a huge risk. I think in practice, there will still be alternatives. There will always be alternatives, and companies will have an open policy because that's another revenue source for them, right? If they sell the API for that product and let other people use it as a backend.
I think the other thing to me that was interesting about the web is that it was essentially open source for a long time. I could look at the source of the web page. I could see what was going on. When somebody did something, I could reverse engineer it. And so that speeded adoption quite a bit. I mean, obviously there's two sides of that, but it's hard to, as they say, it's hard to make predictions, particularly about the future. Why don't we talk a little bit about the challenges that your team faces and my team face, and just kind of how we're kind of navigating. So AI has got all this promise. It's also unlocking other kinds of challenges, I guess. You want to talk a little bit about the things you're kind of wrestling with?
Yeah, I think for us, in terms of using AI as end users, one of the big things is still hallucinations. That still happens, and they're not always easy to notice because hallucinations are very believable. We recently had an incident, or it's not an incident, but an occurrence, let's say, where we asked Gemini something and about AI advancements, and it came up with a list where most of the items were made up, but they were again very detailed and believable. Of course, when you research it, you find that out, or if you ask Gemini, "Hey, are you sure about this?" Then you find out the truth. But I think hallucinations are still a thing. The other thing is AI is still not completely perfect. So, for example, we use Read AI to record meetings, and it's pretty fantastic. One of the things that it does is it summarizes meetings, including action items from the meeting. And what I've noticed is in certain meetings, such as this meeting, where we're just exchanging ideas, Read AI will still come up with some action items based on the conversation that happened at the meeting, even though there aren't any action items, right? But on the other hand, again, it's a fantastic tool. I mean, we have meetings where we converse in Romanian sometimes, and Read AI automatically translates it. It gives us a summary in English. So, yeah, it has other places where it excels.
To me, in terms of the things that we do, the the things that have me concerned are, as you dramatically lower the cost of content generation, I think we're going to see an order of magnitude, or maybe even two orders of magnitude, more content on the web. So there's a challenge of how do you stand out from that. I published an article I don't know, a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn that had a particular organization that had a particular paradigm and a premise and a structure. And like 2 hours later, somebody left a comment that said, "Oh, I wrote an article kind of like this on a slightly different topic." And he had taken the spine of my article, and instead of talking about entrepreneurship, he was talking about, selling AI training services. But there were like 6 or 8, all my topic sentences were just there, but then he had the thing rewrite it. And I thought, that's like a very fast plagiarism, right? So I think the plagiarism problem is going to be there. To me, the piece that's missing with Read AI or Otter or these other transcript tools, which we use, is the companies seem to have wandered into executives don't want to come to meetings, so they'll send their chatbot robot to listen in and send them a summary. And this is like a terrible idea on many levels. It disempowers the team. It's like a surveillance technology. The thing I would like, which we haven't been able to get working yet, when we're in a brainstorming session or in a working session, we have a Google Doc open or a Notion Doc open, and people are contributing, and there's ways to stop from stepping on each other. But what would be very nice is to feed that real-time transcript into either an adjacent document or in that document in a way, because when you're actually brainstorming, it's hard to both have the ideas, voice them, and then capture them at the same time. So that's one challenge we've got. The other question that's not clear to me, so we went from kind of menus. So in the early days of the web, everybody wanted to get on there were various directories, the Yahoo directory, everybody wanted to get their entries into those directories, right? And then all of a sudden it became like got keywords and SEO, and now everybody was figuring out how to get the keywords packed in there, and then they added the page rank. So now you needed a link structure to substantiate your authority. So in each case, the breakthrough comes, and then all of the gaming of the system comes. What I
Right.
don't yet understand, or what I can't predict, in a question-based search model, how do I make sure that my content is somehow discoverable, right? So essentially, that just, to me, it seems like there's a lack of transparency in some of these guys that are spending $1 billion on models.
No, I understand what you mean. Yeah. So that makes perfect sense. Yeah. So you can't really control how they're training the models and what kind of biases those models are going to have.
And now, if I transition from a keyword model to a question model, how is it that I write articles or provide content or develop whatever so that you can be found, right? Because these days, when you're asking, does something exist, you're not getting out the yellow pages, you're not getting out a dictionary or an encyclopedia, you're running a Bing search or a Google search or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I think that is a very big challenge. But there is a tremendous amount of new content out there, like you said, an order of magnitude higher. I think that's accurate. The problem with that is that it's not clear that this content is meaningful and accurate.
Yes, it's definitely the thing that I like that's starting to happen, and we see this for Perplexity and for some of the other ones, is it's starting to provide footnotes. It's starting to say, here's my answer, but by the way, here are some independent substantiation of my claims, or at least you can go check here.
I think that that is one way in which we're going to start to recognize the content that is created with more care and attention to detail is these references that substantiate what's being discussed in the papers, in the articles. I, you know, it's going to continue to be a challenge. I think that there are people who either unknowingly or knowingly are going to create content that's inaccurate and insubstantiated, and it's going to be presented as if it's fact.
And I can go to many websites that where either they're genuinely mistaken or they're intentionally mistaken. I mean, but I think as humans, we've grown up with that problem. That's a problem we kind of understand, right?
It would be
Um,
useful to have a search tool like Google or Bing that automatically filters for the best quality content, which it should be doing already. But to have a search tool that specifically looks for that.
There's this group called Ground Truth News, I think. I'm not an investor or anything, but
Right.
but they read you the news and they say, here's a situation, here's a fact pattern or an incident, and here's how it's being reported in various news entities
Right.
that lean various ways. I think you're going to see more things like that, or at least those kind of tools are going to be available to get more of a 360 view or more of a synoptic view of, it's not just Alex saying this or Alex and Sean. It's actually,
Right. Or Alex says one thing and here's what Sean says and so on. Yeah.
but I think we've learned how to sort that out. I mean, those problems start to occur when you're about 4 or 5, right? People disagree and you decide who you're going to believe, and you
Right.
know, rat hole on challenges. What are the kinds of tools that you've found most useful or easiest to kind of adopt and deploy?
Yeah, I think Read AI is sort of the quintessential example of an extremely useful tool, and a tool that's also extremely easy to adopt because all you do is sign up for it, you configure it to get added to Zoom and Google, and it just works. And if you don't want to record it, you just kick Read AI off of the meeting, and that's it. So that's, I think, a very clear example. Um, I have been using Claude a lot recently, and part of the reason that I'm using that is that they have this feature called artifacts. Uh, we just published a video today where I'm having a conversation with one of my team members, and I'm showing her artifacts on Claude. The main idea here is that responses from an LLM are quite verbose, and so when you have a longer conversation, you tend to have a very large conversation history, and so you have to keep going up and down to see like where's this information and so on. So what Claude did is they created this concept of artifacts, which are really just like a document that captures the response. So your conversation's here, and on the left hand side, and on the right hand side, you have the artifacts. You can have multiple artifacts in a conversation. You can have versions for those artifacts. So, if the response is almost what you want, but not quite, you can say, update this artifact to do blah, blah, blah. And it'll give you another version of it. And I found that extremely useful, especially when having like kind of longer, more involved conversations. I found that that's very helpful. Um, so that has been pretty useful. Another tool, I guess the third one that I can think of that has been very useful has been Gamma. Gamma is a tool that creates presentations. I think I've showcased it in the webinar for Lean Culture.
Yeah, we had Matt Trifero came and used it as well. We haven't tried it, but it's an interesting tool.
Yeah, so I found out that it's pretty useful to create visual presentations and also pretty easy to get into.
Are you guys doing anything with things like GitHub Copilot or other kinds of code generation tools?
Yeah, I do use GitHub Copilot. I find it very useful personally. Actually, recently I've been using it a lot because the way that I use it is not just to generate code, but it can generate entire files. So you can start a brand new file, which is completely empty, and say, do this, like write all the database models in this file. And it'll just, because they usually, in Python at least, they usually go in the same file if the project is not too large. So then I'll generate the entire file, not just like a line or a function and so on. And the other thing that you can do with it is you can open the chat interface as well and say, if I wanted to do X, how should I organize the files? And it'll tell you exactly what files to create, what to put in each of them. So it doesn't help you just with just the code generation, but also with the project organization.
Yeah, this brings up some interesting points. So we're big users of Grammarly, which is now
Yeah,
so vanilla that we don't even think of it as AI anymore. It, it passes the test. It's not AI because it's useful, right?
right.
Um, I've been impressed with Perplexity only because it did two things early that probably everybody is going to do, which are the footnotes and suggesting other questions that are natural follow-on questions, right? Which kind of, if you're new to an area or new to a topic, it kind of is an easy, it's an assist to explore an area.
Yeah.
And we do a lot with Chat GTP to I look at Chat GTP as kind of like a knowledgeable person with common sense who essentially repeats what everybody else knows. It's not, you're not going to get any original ideas, but it's like compressing 100 people's common knowledge into what about these 10 things, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and a lot of times you're sitting around and you go, well, we should think about this, and say, well, give us 12 items we should cover, and 6 of those items maybe either we've already covered or they're nonsense, but 2 or 3 sometimes are, yeah, we should probably add that. That makes sense. But it's not because the tool itself is somehow creative. It's just looking at what everybody else does, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I found it to be a very good tool, especially for and when you treat it as a brainstorming partner, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a good metaphor. I guess I did a whole bunch of work with electronic design automation in the 80s and the 90s. There was this ongoing tension between I want total control over a state machine design or this or that, and then where do you use the automated, auto routers, static timing analysis, state machine tools, right? Where as the structures get more and more complex, you've got to pop up a level in the architecture, right? You don't want to, write, be the master of the details, except where they are essential. Now, the guys that write firmware, they produce 10 lines of code in a month, but there's a lot going on in that 10 lines of code. I guess when you look at what are the higher level decisions or the architectural decisions, what are the things that you and your team keep on your side of the table, and what are you delegating to
Yeah.
an assistant or an AI tool or
Right.
because it seems like there is some kind of demarc, or maybe not it's maybe more like an estuary where the line moves, but nonetheless, you're not going to say write me a letter to this promising new prospect for $100,000 project and then just mail it to him. I don't even want to look at it. Just send it, right? It's like I don't
Right.
think you would do that. Right?
No, no, of course. Yeah. So just to take that example, like say professional communication, I should say as a parenthesis is that I take professional verbal communication pretty seriously. So, and because when writing emails, for example, I have the chance to take my time to review it, I tend to get really in the weeds to make sure that I'm expressing exactly what I want to express. So many times, what I do is I actually get ideas from two different LLMs and then I edit them together, kind of as you would splice together a movie. Like, oh, I like this sentence. This sentence sounds like exactly what I want to say. Let's use that, you know. And it's in a way, it's sort of like so it's not so much that I've delegated the role of PR representative, but it's that I've delegated the legwork of a PR representative assistant. And so for a short while, I can be my own PR representative with help from some assistants that are doing the legwork.
So Scott Adams has got this. It's an old article, but he talks about what do you do when you're stuck writing a movie script,
Yeah.
and he says what you do is you write the bad version. And so somebody
Oh,
just writes this terrible version,
yeah.
and everybody goes, well, we don't know what to do next, but that definitely sucks. But
Yeah.
maybe instead of having like monkeys hanging out of a helicopter with lasers on their toes, we should turn it into this or this or this. And so essentially, it just moves you off of the stuck point somewhere else. And I suspect that's what I think instead of getting locked in like a local maximum or local minimum, I think this is kind of nudging you to consider other things, right? It's more of a brainstorming tool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So that's how we find it useful. Many times, marketing is a prime example of this, and this is primarily how we use it. We start with maybe like sometimes we ask Gemini to generate an image for our LinkedIn posts, and that's been very successful because it does a pretty good job. And our team member who handles marketing, she is quite adept at making some very good looking and pretty original images.
This
And
could
they
be a new
don't.
line of business for you. This could be a second business unit here.
Right. Yeah, yeah. That's right. Because you know how AI images frequently have a certain look and you look at it and you're like, oh, this is AI. So we try to avoid that somehow. And I think generally we've been pretty successful. They look a bit more original. So I think this is the way things go. One thing that I've done recently for one of the groups that I work with is they needed a sting. They have a Future of Work podcast. So they needed an introductory music sting for their podcast. And I made it for them using an AI tool. That's a tool called Suno, which you can use to generate
Now
music.
you got three lines of business you're doing. This is good. This is,
Right.
I actually think these tools are quite hard to, I think they're, so I think it's easy to get results. I think it's hard to get results that somebody doesn't look at it and go, yeah, that's close, but no cigar, right?
Right. Yeah. So especially when generating multimedia, or sorry, when generating media, I'd say it's part of it is not just giving it the prompt, which is certainly very important, but it's also having the patience to generate and regenerate until you get something that sounds decent or looks decent. And I think many people maybe expect that they'll give a prompt, and if the outcome is unsatisfactory, that means that's the best that the tool can do. And really, it's more like kind of a random roll of the dice. If you didn't get what you wanted, try a few more times.
So one person in my, I don't do anything with image generation or anything like that, but one frustration one of the people on my team has is they look at this, they generate something and everything's great except right in this area right here. I just like to circle that and say just change this. But it doesn't seem like there's an easy way to so if you're working with an artist, if you're and we will also still work with artists, you can go to the artist and go, this is great, but right here you got to fix this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we're quite there yet. I think there are open source tools that will let you do some very, like, you can chain a bunch of different models together and achieve the results that you want. But then obviously, instead of just giving it the prompt, you actually put together all the different components. Like, this is a model that generates, I don't know, text, and this is a model that generates an image in a manga style. And then you chain all of those together yourself, and you get exactly the kind of image that you're looking for.
Yeah.
The way that most of these, and this is true for text generation as well, right? The way that these generative models work is they're trained to generate an image that's this size. And so when you ask them to generate, that's what they generate. They don't know what the image contains. Like, they know what the image contains in as much as they take the prompt to generate it. Yeah, but they don't have this ability yet to say change only components of the image.
But in your example of taking two different streams of output from two different LM models, because it's text, when you get to the finish line, so if you're like 93% of where you want to be, you just edit it, right? You don't keep reprompting and reprompting. You just go, okay, I'm just gonna get in
Yeah,
here and do surgery, and then I'm done, right?
right. Yeah,
So
it's a bit easier because it's with text. Uh, Text is easy to edit, right?
right,
So
right.
so there's that. Technically speaking, somebody that had Photoshop skills, right? The way that they would use image generation, right, is they would generate the image and they would say, "Oh, I have this little part that needs to be changed." So they generate another image that would be what they want to change from the original image, and then take those two images and composite them
Blend them.
together in
Yes,
Photoshop.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. The final kind of area of exploration is what does this look like in terms of impact on people's lives and an impact on the future of work and how to get ready for both. So I'm just curious, what do you see coming?
So I think the most important skill for anybody in any career to learn right now is prompt engineering. That's the most important thing. So what I mean by that is prompt engineering is kind of a weird discipline in the sense that it's only existed for as long as ChatGPT has been popular. What it consists of is one, understanding how to describe what you want very specifically. And this is a skill that many times people don't absolutely need, because when you tell someone else what you want, many times they just understand it, they glean it. Whatever words you're using, they will just glean what exactly you mean. LLMs don't have that power. You have to tell them specifically what you want, right? So it's a conversational skill to some degree, a communication skill, to be precise and detailed. And the other part of prompt engineering is understanding how what you want, the words that you're using to describe what you want, how those things are being interpreted by the specific tool you're using. Now, there are strategies here that will work for any tool, um, but certain tools have specific responses to specific prompts. So, for example, if you're generating images, it's helpful to describe the style of image you're looking for. And sometimes you're able to even describe the style of the image in terms of, I'd like an image that looks like it's been painted by Picasso or whatever, right? So you have arbitrary degrees of precision in what you're describing, right? So this connects to having a precise and detailed prompt, but this is sort of the technical aspect of the prompt engineering side.
Interesting. So there's a thing called Amara's law, which says we overestimate the impact of a technology in the next year and underestimate it in the next decade, right? And one example is Kennedy says we're going to go to the moon in like 1963. And I think there's a 24,001 bet placed in a British bookmaking association because we were nowhere near going to the moon in 7 years, right?
Right.
And yet we did. When I started doing websites back in 1993, we had Emacs and FTP. And so you would write the HTML right there down on the bare metal and then FTP it up, and there you had your website, right?
Yep.
And then, spell check got added and HTML checkers got added and then link checkers got added. And all of a sudden there were these integrated systems that took care of all that for you, right? And so it didn't really, if you looked at the clerical skills of the person, those got obsoleted, but somehow what the content is and how it should be linked and how to present it, all that, they didn't really make any of that easier, right? And I think it's hard to tell what the residue is or what you should get good at. So when you say prompt engineering, what I'm hearing is you've got to get very good at effective delegation to these generation technologies, right?
Right.
Asking the right questions, framing the outputs you want.
Right. And so these tools now, basically, getting good at prompt engineering is essentially just a fancy way of saying get good at writing prompts. And the reason I find that's important is that generative AI, I think, is the most important aspect of AI that right now is affecting the labor market. So content creation, code generation, image generation, all of those things are things that are directly impacting the future of work. That's obviously just my opinion, but I think it's pretty easy to see that point.
But we work with a lot of early stage teams, and they make the transition from I'm doing the work to either I'm going to hire a contractor, I'm going to outsource development, I'm going to hire an employee. And then they discover that you can't just tell the person, well, go do this, and then I'll know it when I see it, right? You actually have to provide, you can, but that's very expensive and everybody gets angry with you. And so to me, this is, instead of learning how to delegate to humans, you're learning how to delegate to algorithms, and to do that probably in an iterative or refining model. That's an interesting, so at that level, I think the problem is people, when some people say prompt engineering, it's like I've got this book of magic spells and I can sell it to you for whatever, how much money, but I don't think that's what you're saying. I think you're saying you've got to get better at understanding how to manage at a higher level what it is you're trying to get the tool to accomplish.
Right. And like you said, there's a lot of overlap between delegating to a person and delegating to a large language model. So I think becoming good at this is generally beneficial for any person because no matter where you work, most of the time you'll be working with other people. So being able to encode using natural language what it is that you're looking for, right, is important in any team. And when I say prompt engineering, I think it's not enough to just find a list of prompts and use them. I think that's helpful, right? That's like when you're learning to write, right?
That's
You
the book
read
of spells. That's the book of spells approach, right?
exactly. But the ultimate goal that you should get to, that the user should get to as soon as possible, is to start writing their own spells, right? I think that's what I mean by prompt engineering. It's not enough just to find the right prompt and reuse it. It's you can do that in the beginning as you're getting used to the tool and understanding. That's part of the learning process of learning how to write prompts. But ultimately, you want to know how to write your own prompts because for two reasons. Obviously, whatever book of spells you may find, no matter how extensive, is probably not going to cover every single use case that you care about. That's one part of it. The other part of it is that tools change. The prompt that used to work in the previous model of ChatGPT may not work the same way in the newer model. So you have to slightly adjust it. It's sort of like changing, like delegating from you've been delegating to the same person for a year now, and all of a sudden that person uh, is promoted, and now you're working with someone else. So the exact same words are not going to work. You may have to make some small adjustments. It's not anything else but just facilitating the communication. If you know the words that that person understands, then using them is just going to make things smoother.
Interesting. Other remarks, final observations, insights for any bold predictions or?
I think there's a lot that could be coming. Whatever it is, I'm excited to see it. And AI is safe. Don't be scared of AI. I think those are my final words.
So there was a great article in about a 19, I think 82, 84 Scientific American by John Rockart that was like computers, collaboration, and markets or something. I should, we'll have to clean this up in the transcript. But his paradigm was we're looking at computers as enabling calculation, and what they're now starting to do is to enable coordination and collaboration. And the long-term effects of that are hard to predict. But he had a sequence that many technologies went through where they enter as a cost reduction. And so that's how a lot of people are talking about things now. Instead of paying an artist, I'm going to use whatever and generate, I got 40 options. And for the most part, the AI tool doesn't get tired of me, whereas the artist might go, well, you make up your damn mind, right? But so there's the cost reduction. Then the next phase is more use because now you realize what's possible. And so you start to embed it. And then the third phase is you actually get these new structures that make extremely intensive use of a technology or a capability. And I think we're somewhere right now between I'm using to save cost or I'm seeing other ways to apply it. I don't know that we've yet seen what it looks like to work in environments where I went to the Python conference, I think in like 2013, 2014, and I had this epiphany that these pictures they were showing were like 10,000 CPU hours. Right? In other words, they were doing all this grinding and they were coming up with some prediction about a drug or a financial market that was a lot of CPU hours, right? And movies are CPU millennia, right, to generate some of these movies. But I think we're looking at just a level of computation to do this that it's hard to predict what that third phase looks like. So I guess that's not really a prediction beyond. I can only see a little ways down the road. This
Yeah,
has been very good, Alex. I really appreciate your time today to walk around this and to do this.
yeah, it's always a pleasure talking to you. And right now we're still in the wild west of AI. Yeah, it's the gold rush, and there are no rules. There's no rule enforcement. It's just everybody. It's the maximum amount of creativity uh, I think that we're going to have in this industry. Over time, we're going to have more regulation, probably. We're going to have more ethical constraints as thought leaders actually understand how AI could impact society in negative ways. And probably most importantly is we're going to start to have best practices. So at a certain point, we're going to do fewer things, or we're going to have fewer ways of doing things because we're going to coalesce towards the best ways of doing things.
Well, right. So I will break here. We have more for another topic someday.
Yeah.
Thanks again for taking part. I'm gonna
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Sean. Pleasure talking
bye.
to you, sir.